The Hopi are natives of northwestern Arizona. They are an ancient indigenous people, and their history dates back to 500 A.D. A peaceful agricultural people, they feel a close bond with the earth. Their ancient prophecy warned them well in advance of the coming of the white men. Very spiritual in nature, they chose the path of nonviolence because it is what their prophecy instructed them to do. For thousands of years they have waited in anticipation of these times and the arrival of the blue star and red star Kachinas, at which time global cataclysms will reorder the nature of life on our planet. The Hopi are a spiritual and peaceful people, and they see us entering a time of great danger. To their credit, they have made several attempts to warn world leaders. The Hopi have repeatedly warned our leaders that World War III will be started in either India, China, the Islamic nations, or Africa. As a result, the United States will be destroyed by atomic bombs and radioactivity. A similar prophecy was also given to us by the ancient Egyptians in the years following the Hebrew Exodus in the newly revealed wisdom text, the Qumran Bible. In it, the Egyptian soothsayers warn us that one warship will pass into the four quarters of the earth, talking peace and bringing war. The operative phrase here is talking peace. This is important when you consider the driving message of the three great desert god beliefs, where Judaism is a celebration of life, Christianity is a religion of love, and Islam is the religion of peace. As the author of Crossing the Cusp, Surviving the Edgar Cayce Pole Shift, I'm fascinated with Hopi prophecy and its predictions of a coming pole shift in our times. For these reasons, the Hopi Blue Star Kachina prophecy is likewise a dire warning for our times, and one that can only be ignored through hubris and arrogance. With this in mind, let's now review this urgent prophecy for our times in terms of its most scientifically relevant points. The prophecy warns us that we will see two Kachinas, or gods if you will. The first is the Blue Star Kachina. It will be the harbinger of the far more deadly Red Star Kachina that follows behind it. This form of prophecy is consistent with that of other predictions throughout history, in where we are first given the harbinger to know that we are in harm's way, and then the catastrophic event itself that occurs if we choose to ignore the prophecy. What really piqued our interest as researchers is that the Hopi prophecy gives us two very clear physical attributes for the Blue Star Kachina, whether that turns out to be Comet Elenin or not. The prophecy tells us that the Blue Star Kachina will appear with what the Hopi call nephews. Interestingly enough, NASA JPL imagery clearly shows smaller objects that are not orbiting Elenin, but rather moving in parallel with it. The Hopi nephews, if you will. The second physical attribute focuses our attention on the Blue Kachina itself. According to the prophecy, those who are at peace in their hearts already are in the great shelter of life. There is no shelter for evil. When the Sakwaha, Blue Star Kachina, dances in the plaza and removes his mask, the time of the great trial will be here. The operative phrase here is that the Blue Star Kachina removes his mask, or in other words, it is a very sudden unmasking. In part 2 of this program, we're going to look at other notable comets from the past to see if this is really possible with Comet Elenin. As researchers, we were taken aback by the amount of disinformation we initially saw in the topic. However, disinformation does have its uses. It tells you about the false positives, And this allows you to focus on the core issues, and that is where you begin to connect the dots. And when we did, an unsettling pattern formed. In this program, we're going to compare the presently available hard data about Comet Elenin with 3 other notable comet flyby events from the past. The first of which was the fear and panic created by the 1910 flyby of Halley's Comet. Then we'll look at how Comet Linear completely broke apart in 2000. And finally, how Comet Holmes surprised astronomers in 2007 with a completely unexpected and sudden brightening. During the 1910 flyby of Halley's Comet, there was a lot of concern in the United States that the comet would poison all life on the planet. So where did this concern come from? In the latter half of the 19th century, scientists developed the ability to analyze the composition of comets, and when Halley's Comet appeared in 1910, they discovered that it was outgassing hydrogen cyanide. In other words, the hydrogen cyanide within the comet was dissolving and being released into the coma and tail. Now let's fast forward to July 30th of this year and a discovery about Comet Elenin that was, frankly, rather disturbing. This is when the Joint Astronomy Center reported the discovery of hydrogen cyanide in the composition of Comet Elenin. Here's where the fears that attended the flyby of Halley's Comet in 1910 and the flyby of Comet Elenin this year connect. Both comets are comprised of, and likewise outgas, hydrogen cyanide. Like Halley's Comet, Comet Elenin also presents the danger of Earth flying through the comet's tail and the possibility of hydrogen cyanide poisoning. In fact, this was such a concern in 1910 that many people bought gas masks and anti-cyanide comet pills from snake oil salesmen. Others organized comet parties with the intention of meeting the end in a more enjoyable setting. Given that Earth could fly through Comet Elenin's tail, will Americans buy gas masks and organize comet parties like they did in 1910? Perhaps. But we're more concerned about Comet Elenin's hydrogen cyanide outgassing for another reason. Although most scientists still think of comets as dirty snowballs, many now view these objects as being more complex than that. Aside from being a deadly poisonous gas that can enhance the blueness of a comet, hydrogen cyanide also has one other critical attribute. It is a natural dielectric. In an electric universe, hydrogen cyanide behaves like an electrical insulator, and it can turn a comet into a large cosmic capacitor capable of storing a massive charge, one that can be released in the blink of an eye and for any number of reasons. One way to imagine a comet as a capacitor can be found in a common office copier. The next time the repairman comes to service the copier in your office, ask him why the copier needs to have its own dedicated connection to the wall outlet, as opposed to being plugged into a surge protector. He'll likely tell you when you turn on the copier, the first thing it does is to draw in a massive amount of electricity from the wall outlet, more than a common surge protector will allow. The reason for this is that copiers use large capacitors to store the energy needed to properly make copies, so that when you press the copy button, the machine lights up and makes a perfect copy every time. Given that Comet Elenin is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide, a gas with dielectric properties, and that it has taken some 10,000 years to return to the core of our solar system, what we essentially have is a comet with the capability to behave like a powerful cosmic capacitor. Interestingly enough, there is a historical precedent in Comet S4 Linear. In 2000, it mysteriously disintegrated just as it was about to transit the ecliptic. Assuming that Comet Elenin is A. Behaving like a large capacitor because it is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide. B. That it has taken over 10,000 years to arrive here in the core of our system. And C. That during this time it may have collected a great electrical charge. Could then we see that Elenin's transit from the southern skies of our solar system through the ecliptic and into the northern skies of our solar system be the cosmic trigger, so to speak, that punches its button? One answer to that question can easily be found in the mysterious disintegration of Comet S4 Linear in 2000. Just a few days before it was to transit the ecliptic, S4 Linear suddenly and unexpectedly disintegrated. It was as though it had hit an electrically charged brick wall and shattered apart. At the time, scientists debated whether S4 Linear was simply an old dirty snowball whose time had come, whereas others maintained that it had hit something. If it did hit something, what exactly did it hit? An asteroid or some remaining fragment of another comet? Or, as many now maintain, that this is what happens when you live in an electric universe? If so, that now gives us pause for concern. This is because we may yet see a historical connection between Comet S4 Linear and Comet Elenin. If so, on or about September 11th of this year, Comet Elenin will reach its point of perihelion, its closest distance to the Sun. At about the same time, it likewise transits the ecliptic. If this perihelion and ecliptic transit proves to be a double whammy, could it be enough to punch Comet Elenin's button, so to speak? And what would that look like? For that, we look backward in time to 2007 and the sudden and unexpected brightening of Comet Holmes in October of that year, at which time its coma, the gaseous dust ball surrounding it, expanded to a size larger than the diameter of our own Sun, briefly making it the largest object in the solar system. This brings us to Comet Elenin, which early in August of this year brightened more than expected. Likewise, it also expanded to a size greater than that of the diameter of planet Jupiter, and it continues to grow. And now here's the kicker. Distance. Comet Holmes passed through the system beyond the orbit of Mars. However, Comet Elenin will pass between us and the average distance to the planet Venus, much closer. So with this in mind, before we move on to part 3 of our program, let's briefly review what we've covered so far. Comet Elenin is accompanied by other objects moving in parallel with it, or nephews, as the Hopi prophecy calls them. Like Halley's Comet, Comet Elenin is partly comprised of hydrogen cyanide, which is a deadly gas for life on this planet. Likewise, hydrogen cyanide also serves as a natural dielectric, which greatly enhances Comet Elenin's ability to collect and store a huge negative charge. Then, like Comet Holmes, Comet Elenin unexpectedly brightened in early August of this year, as its coma expanded to a diameter greater than that of the planet Jupiter. With this in mind, we wait for September 11, when this highly charged comet reaches its point of perihelion, its closest distance to the Sun, while at the same time it also transits the ecliptic. All this raises the question, could Comet Elenin disintegrate or outburst like Comet S4 Linear did in 2000, just prior to its transit of the ecliptic? And could this odd confluence of powerful cosmic forces push Comet Elenin's button, so to speak? If so, we could suddenly see its coma grow to the diameter of the Sun. And what does that mean for us? Consider this. On or about September 26th of this year, Comet Elenin will not only be between us and the Sun, it will also be closer to us than the planet Venus, with a coma larger than the diameter of our own Sun. With this, we're now ready to move on to our forecast in part 3 of this program. And no doubt there are some heavy questions weighing on your mind, namely being, what does this mean to me and when?